morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. We are excited about our guest today. It's a little bit unusual. I feel like we have like a superstar among us. Joel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Erin.
Earlier, before we got started, now I'm all intimidated. We've got a professional here. Lucas, good to see you again, hailing from San Francisco, checking in with us early.
Yep. Morning, Erin.
So Joel, I could introduce you as a celebrity, but we'll just introduce you as a longtime TV commentator, Kansas City Royals commentator. Is that the right words to use? And motivational speaker. And I'm super excited and passionate about everything that I was listening to you and Lucas talk about in the pre-show, being someone who does do moderating and commentating from time to time and really just finds the skill of being able to build audiences, engage with them in a meaningful way, an authentic way, and building trust and all these things that you guys talked about and touched on earlier. I'm curious if maybe we can just start out knowing that our audience is associations and people are going to go sportscaster associations. Maybe you can just draw a line for us a little bit about how your career has intersected in both of those areas.
Yeah, and I mean the speaking business that I run started about 6 years ago. I mean, I'm lucky enough that I'm completely off for 6 months of the year, which makes it sound like, oh, what a cush job. But, the other 6 months a year is 6 to 7 days a week, sometimes 20 days at a time. I host our pre and post game show and travel with the team. So it's 2 shows per day. So sometimes up to 14 per week, sometimes more if we have a double header as we did this week. And so it's a lot, but the way that it intersects is that there are, what makes baseball so much more unique than all the other sports, and I like all the other sports, I love them all, but is that it's every day. And so you can pull lessons, I think, from anything. But when you're talking about a sport, and I do tell audiences that you don't want to be measured at the same level of success as baseball players because they get rewarded when they're successful 30% of the time. You really don't want to be failing 70% of the time. However, when you have to manage failure at 70 to 80% of the time, there are really a lot of lessons to learn that can be passed on to groups. And so I always tell people my speeches are not sports speeches or baseball speeches. If you happen to like baseball, it's a bonus. The baseball is a storytelling and teaching tool coming from a group that I cover on an everyday basis that's very diverse and is dealing with a lot of adversity. And so that's really where it all plays out. And oh, by the way, it's not as simple as just having the best talent to win a game. There's a lot of luck, of course, but it's also building the right teams, which involves people and involves culture and involves leadership.
Yeah, no, I love that. Before Lucas jumps in, I just want to say I appreciate the fact that you're noticing the baseball 30% to 70%, because I use that all the time when I've got employees or coworkers who are super freaked out about performance. I'm going, look, like there is actually a level of sport out there where literally people are being rewarded for being good 30% of the time. Yeah. So, be more risk-taking, be more adventurous in understanding how to learn from those failures, because otherwise too many people feel the pressure to be right 100% of the time, and then you get nothing, you get paralysis. So I'm curious to hear how that plays out, but I'm going to let Lucas dive in. I know he's got plenty to talk about.
It is an interesting dynamic that, people in our culture feel like we have to bat 1,000 and at a professional level, that you're not even close. But I had the pleasure of being on Joel's podcast, Rounding the Bases, and I've gone back since and watched a lot of the episodes. And one of the things that Joel talks about is he does a great job of weaving his baseball history and his knowledge and his experience with all of these connections into a lot of conversation around leadership. And we talked about in the pre-conversation about this element of trust and what that looks like in today's culture and how that impacts the culture. And I want to turn it over to Joel to sort of re-emphasize and bring that up about, what does that look like today and why is that so important?
Well, I think first off, Lucas, I think it's always been important. I guess we can make the argument it's more important now than ever. That sounds a little cliche because we could probably always make that argument. It's never been more important than now to build trust. But we all know, you both know, and everyone that is listening to this podcast knows that the world is a different place right now. And with that comes some good and some bad. And so we have been separated, whether it was during the pandemic or found the convenience now. Look at the 3 of us getting together and doing this podcast. We're all in 3 different cities and we're not thinking twice about that. And a couple of years ago, we would have sat there and thought, so Lucas and I have gotten to know each other a little bit. We've never met in person before. So if Erin at all felt like she was a little behind, it's not like Lucas and I have this long history, but we were able to build some rapport with a pre-call that we did, and then the podcast, and then the three of us just chatted before we came on. That's what I do with my guests as well, and that's got to be good enough. But can we dive deeper? How meaningful are those conversations that we're having, and can we be intentional, whether it's face to face or not, with building that trust? Trust is not something that you achieve and you check a box.
Right.
It is something that you constantly have to work on. That's always been the same. I would argue that maybe we have to work a little bit harder now and be a little bit more intentional, yet it's right there for us on a Zoom call or however we want to do this. And so I'll give you this quick example, and I could go on and on because trust is my favorite topic. But we right now, as we're recording this, I'm in Toronto. The Royals are getting ready to play the Toronto Blue Jays for 4 games. Toronto is the one city in Major League Baseball where you have to be, I shouldn't say city, but Canada, you have to be vaccinated to get into the country. Now, the Kansas City Royals, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent here, made some major headlines yesterday because instead of having the 1 or 2 or maybe 3 players that some teams have that they have to replace for a few days, we had 10. That's a whole different discussion that I certainly have no interest in having. You guys probably don't either, about vaccines and all this type of stuff. But the reality of it is the Royals had to replace 10 players for 4 days. And then again, there's so much more involved with that. But what I did the moment I got on the team plane last night, and I fly with the team, and I intentionally got there early knowing that there would be these 10, 12, 15 minor league guys, many of whom had never been to the major leagues before. And this is a pretty cool experience. They're about to go from flying Southwest Airlines at 6 a.m. flights to flying on a team charter and
Yeah.
Four Seasons Hotel and on and on and on. And I intentionally walked to the back of the plane where I typically wouldn't go. I kind of stick to myself, let the players be the players before all the regulars got on the plane, because I knew those young guys would be there first. And I went and I shook every single one of their hands and congratulated them. It's good to have you here. Looking forward to watching you. And it's just that little touch point. Now, that doesn't mean I've built or earned their trust, but it was a first step. Or for some that I already knew, it was the next step. And I'll go when I walk into the clubhouse today, the locker room, and I'll do the same thing again. And I will chit chat with every single one of those guys, knowing that they're just replacements for 3 or 4 days, many of them. Their time may not even come for 2 years, if ever. But when it does come, I don't want to start from square one. And the other thing too is I've already done some of that at spring training. I've already met these guys in the past. They see me on TV. It never stops. And that is a constant no matter what day and age that we're in.
Yeah.
Small little deposits, throughout different experiences and interactions. I think trust is something that it builds over time. It's never going to go from 1 to 100 in a first conversation. You have to continue to just find creative ways. I would say the element that it's more difficult today, you have to be more creative. It isn't, we don't do it the way that we used to. I'm here in San Francisco at an event, and we're shaking hands and pressing flesh the old school way, but that's new for some people, and that's new to a culture. Right? We mentioned that this generation behind us that grew up in a digital age, and that is how they have learned to develop relationships, and that's different. And I think the gap between the generations are going to have to sort of find a way to meet in the middle and understand and relate. It's not too different than understanding somebody's personality in a way that Joel and Aaron have a different personality than me, but we have to recognize that and then sort of discover a new way to interact and make sure that relationship is meaningful.
Yeah, and I'll take this a step further. I'm thinking about it a little bit when you talk about the up and coming generation, the younger generation, and that's certainly my world. I think that's all of our worlds, right? I mean, if you look at the associations that you guys are dealing with right now, both of you, it's not the same group that it always was. You're starting to see a lot, and especially as things open up now, and you might be meeting some people that are younger that have a totally different perspective than where we came from, and that shouldn't be a right or wrong. That's their perspective. That's where it's at. And so I'll use this example: social media, whether you like it, whether you don't like it. We certainly know that the up and coming generation only knows that world. That's not the only thing that they know, but they've never known a world without it, right? And And some people are able to ignore the social media. But here's the thing: what I'm starting to see now is, I want to get all these players' cell phone numbers. I really don't use it a whole lot, but you never know when you need to reach out. But I find it more effective a lot of times to reach out to them with a message on Instagram. They're going to get it quicker. They're going to remember to respond to it. That sounds crazy to me. That seems like a text would be the easiest way. But I get more traction with that younger group. So if we've got 22, 23, 24-year-olds that I'm going to be covering here the next couple of days, some are already here. I mean, our best player is 22 years old. And I'm going to get more traction by posting something on my Instagram story, and I can see that they saw it or that they liked it. And now, as I build these relationships, if they post something about I got engaged to my fiance, or my family's coming in here, I've got this big moment there, I'll just jump right on their Instagram and say congrats, and that's it. And it's just a little touch point. I think let's not go too far and say, oh, like we all like everybody's stuff, and you like everybody's hitting the hearts and everybody's the thumbs up and the emojis and all that kind of stuff. So we got to be careful that there's meaning behind it, that we're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. But I think that again, when someone posts, you have an opportunity to chime in, and just a touch point. The bulk of what I do with these guys every day is not formal interviews. It's not a microphone in their face. It's chit-chatting in the dugout. It's chit-chatting on the field, in the locker room, in the hallway, and just a minute, 2 minutes, sometimes with a language barrier and stuff that's lost in translation. But just letting them know that you're there, that you're interested. We all want to be validated, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe we need to reevaluate the way that we are validating other people, because they're communicating in different ways right now.
I think that's, one of the things that I'm hearing, especially if I think about trust, and I'm wondering how you help associations and other clients of yours bridge this gap in audience. One of the things I think we've actually shortchanged ourselves with, especially our generation, is that, or any older generation, always thinks that newer generation is like lost, or, does something completely different. And so to your point, yes, we've all got to get social media under our belt, because that is a way of communicating. But trust is also built with not building up pre-assuming what people are like, presuming like what people are like. So I've found more often than not that, Gen Zers, some of the really young Gen Yers, like they do use technology and social media a lot more than any of our generation or our older generations. But they do still really appreciate personal touch, having relationships, meeting people in person. And when we just make a presumption that that's not part of the way in which they communicate or connect, we're missing an opportunity to build trust, to say, hey, we believe that you're just as deep or as emotional or as connected as any other individual, regardless of the fact that you have this other piece of technology thing that, to your point, isn't the only thing they know. It's just they don't know anything without it. And I think that's a good distinction you make. So how do you help people understand, sort of bridging those gaps where you're not just putting people in buckets of ways in which they want to be talked to or communicated with?
Yeah, and I don't think you should put anyone in a bucket. I think that you just need to understand, at least from a starting standpoint, that okay, this generation, for the most part, is going to use social. By the way, not all of them will,
right?
And not all of them will use it in the same ways, right? I mean, some of us use it for self-promotion. Some of us use it for just reaching out, whatever the reasons are. And so I think, Aaron, that more than anything else, you have to be able just to read people. The expression that I love using all the time, I actually wrote it in my book and I talk about it a lot, is do you have an ability to read the room? Yeah. And that's nothing new, by the way, either. But I do think that people are so much more on alert right now. I think that people, look, we just went through a couple of years worth. I guess we're still going through in some ways. We just went through a couple of years worth of events that we've never been through in our life.
Right.
No one is the same today as they were then. Some people are better, some people are worse, some businesses are better, some businesses are worse, but we're not the same. And so, when I constantly talk about what makes you different, what can make you different is just the ability to empathize, just the ability to listen, just the ability. And this I've seen forever in baseball, because we tend to put our heroes on pedestals. Yeah. And I get that. But once you get past it, I'll regularly have people say, what's it like to interview so-and-so, or what's it like? And for me, it's just everyday stuff, right? I mean, sometimes I've been lucky enough interview some, you used the word celebrity, which was funny before, Aaron, but true celebrities, like Hollywood type of celebrities. I
Yeah.
mean, we're lucky enough in Kansas City every year that Paul Rudd, Jason Sudeikis, aka Ted Lasso, Eric Stonestreet from Modern Family, Rob Riggle, he's the guy that had the taser in The Hangover, the taser scene. These guys are all from Kansas City. They come back and they do a major event every single year to raise money for charity, and I get to interview them for an inning of a baseball game every year. It's like the most hysterical thing ever. I was so wide-eyed and googly-eyed the first time I did it, and everybody, oh my gosh, what's it like? Oh my gosh, what's it like? And now I could just sit there and have it's mind-boggling how quick-witted those guys are, but they're just people. They're just guys.
Yeah.
And once you understand that someone like Paul Rudd or someone like any superstar, whether it was Cal Ripken back in the day when when Lucas was growing up to the biggest superstar in the game now, they're going through stuff too.
Right.
And so we all are, and we're all going through more stuff. I mean, if you think, like I mentioned, the whole thing with the vaccines, and I won't be critical. I try to really stay connected with everyone, but these 10 guys chose to bypass their salary and skip out on their team. And that had to have been a really difficult thing to do. And that wasn't just a wake up and make a decision, right? I don't necessarily agree with their decision, but my point is we are all going through some things we've never been through before. I think that creates an opportunity for all of us if we're willing to listen, empathize, and let people speak and be heard, that not everyone gets right now.
Right.
And I think that would apply to anyone in any audience. That is not a specific, and this is where you guys are very similar to me in a couple of ways with all the associations. There's not just one type of person in there. Meaning, of course, like, you go to a bank and there's all types of different people, but they're bankers. They're in that industry, and in my world, when I go and tell a story on television, because I'm also our in-game reporter, I've got to be able to cater to the diehard, stat person. At the same time, I've got to be able to cater to the person that just is interested in the human interest story, and they're less interested in the game and they're more interested in the human aspect of it. If we're paying attention, we're listening, there is a way to I think include everyone, whether it's in an audience, a company, an association, whatever it is, but you got to really pay attention to it.
Totally.
Yeah. And it played out perfectly, if you will, throughout the pandemic. Those associations who emphasize, as you said, Joel, listened to their members and acted on that, those are the ones that really found success. There was all this money being thrown around from the government, and the ones that jumped in and helped their members, get access to that, for example, or educated their members with new content, that drew their members in. That built some trust, as we talked about. And they did that through just responding to what their members really needed and understanding what they needed and where they were at the moment, in the moment. And, we go through cyclical waves within the association industry. 10 years ago, hey, our association's even going to survive? And I think we're riding a wave up right now of relevance just by doing that. And the next phase that was happening in parallel for the last 5 years is, how do we recruit this younger generation? How do we replace all of these baby boomer members and executives and bring people into our industry and show our value and do all these things? And I think, to your point, listening, empathizing with that younger generation, and some of them, the older executives, and they're just people that have been in the industry for a while, listening, empathizing, and understanding will be the key. And, I've had the pleasure of following you, Joel, for a little while and watching you, and a lot of what you speak into from a truth and leadership perspective, I think resonates through that. And I think you have a lot of value there to bring to the industry for that leadership perspective.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that. And, I think these messages, everything we're talking about, again, applies to everyone. So can I go and speak to a banking conference? Yes, I do. A banking association, and then go and speak to a bunch of dentists or a bunch of people in construction or engineers, and those are totally different groups of people. Back to what Aaron said before too, like, you can't just lump everybody into one and just assume that they're all in that one bucket. But when I show up to speak to a banking association, my attire, just to start, is going to be different than it is when I
Right.
go speak to a bunch of electricians. Why would I want to show up with a bunch of electricians that are going to boo me off the stage if I'm in a suit and tie?
Right.
Right. And so we're already off to a bad start. So understanding who you're with, understanding what's the right time, the wrong time. It sounds like such a dumb thing, but I always ask any organizer, okay, what's the attire? What will people be wearing? And then let's make sure that I'm not
Right.
the worst dressed person. I don't necessarily have to be the best dressed, but better to be best than worst in that category. But let's not wear a tuxedo to a group that's in jeans and belt buckles, you know,
Yeah.
and because you're not gonna give yourself a chance. So that's a tiny little thing, but just being aware of that. The other piece to this too, because you know, we're the three of us maybe are in danger of sounding like the old people in the room, which I don't think we are. I recently turned 50, and again, being surrounded by a bunch of athletes that are 22, 25. The older ones right now are 28 or 30. I am being reminded every day that I often am the oldest guy in the room, which is
Right.
weird. But what I notice is this: people are interested in what I have to say and my expertise and my all my years of being around this, because there's not a whole lot that surprises me anymore. I've seen it all, been there, done that, yet something new happens every day. But they're not as interested in what I have to say if I'm not interested in what they have to say. And so can we learn, if we're that older generation? I still don't think we're that old, but if we're that older generation, are we willing to listen to the younger generation? Guess what? We might learn from them, and you will learn from them. And when you learn from them, they're willing to learn from you. And that right there is part of getting back to the trust, getting back. If you give people a voice, and by the way, this is true of a CEO. This is true of whoever's on the top of the food chain, so to speak. This is true of the biggest superstar athletes, the biggest. It's one of my signature stories that it took me 7 years to earn the trust and the respect and to build a relationship with Albert Pujols, perhaps the greatest player of his generation, one of the probably top 5 players in the history of Major League Baseball. And I failed miserably at it for 7 years. And what finally got me to break through was me pulling him aside privately and asking him a personal question and asking for his advice on a potential move that I had coming up to a place that he grew up in Kansas City. And once we crossed that, suddenly he was there for me for everything else. We've got to be willing to let people voice their opinions and be interested in their advice too.
Yeah, I do agree with you on that one. If you're not interested in what someone else is saying, I'm not quite sure why you would think they'd be interested in you. It is a relationship. It's a two-way street.
But Aaron, think about how many of us skip that step.
Right.
Because we want to get to the finish line.
True.
And I'll go back to all these young athletes that are here with us today. I don't even know if some of them will ever make it full time. They're all trending that way, but something will happen, an injury, a trade, or whatever it is. But you never know, and so you just take interest in them, and and be interested in who they are and their story and their families and all these type of things, and then without an end goal, really. I mean, just the goal of building and then seeing where it goes.
Well, my end goal is to have this interview last forever, but I'm going to be respectful of everyone's time because my job, sadly, is always the person who has to get us to the finish line at the end. So I'm going to wrap us up, but I do hope we can get you back here, because I feel like there's a whole other world we could talk about, just in the way in which, your job, your day job, let's say, just creating content on the fly and based on what's happening right then, and the personal interest in mixing it with the statisticians and what's really important in the sport versus the human. So I just feel like we could have a whole secondary conversation on how to engage audiences. But this was really awesome, and actually a very different way for us to be talking to our audience. So we really appreciate you being here with us today and sharing some of your insights.
Well, I have to compliment you too, because that was a masterful segue to get us back on track, to get me back on track. That's what I have to do every single day with the pre and the post game show.
Right.
How am I going to get from this to that? And oh, by the way, every now and then they will throw us some sponsored elements where you have no choice, and it's like,
right.
Hey, how am I going to get from talking about this sponsored notification about colon cancer to today's lineup? We're going to find a way, and there's always a segue. But
Aaron is a celebrity in bringing us home.
yes.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Well, anyway, we always wrap these episodes with asking our guests to see if they have any thoughts on someone we should interview as well, to just broaden our audience, broaden our messaging. And so, Joel, we're just curious, do you have anyone in mind that you think we should be bringing on to the show to hear a different perspective from?
You know, I was thinking about this in advance because I've got about 1,000 of them, as you might imagine, which and that's just, you know, doing 2 podcasts a week and then all the years of everything else. But and this isn't meant to be self-serving. It doesn't help me, but people in the speaking world know this guy a lot. But I have he's actually my business coach, but he's a long-time speaker. And not all of his clients are speakers per se either. Named Mark LeBlanc. He's written multiple books. I don't know if you guys know Mark at all. And his perspective on everything in how to connect with people and how to take care of people, and every bit of that is. I actually just had a session with him, my monthly session with him this morning, and I walk away every time thinking, oh, just incredibly enlightening. And what I love about Mark, he's actually been a guest on my podcast, instrumental in helping me with the process of writing my first book. He'll be instrumental in the second book, which is not quite been started yet, but we're getting there. Is that he understands how to go about all this without being, how would I say it, annoying. There's so much of that out there. You know, a lot of us have lost our ability to connect in a healthy way. We just everybody's looking for shortcuts, and he's really taught me the right way to go about that. But he's very, very deep, very so that would be my recommendation.
I love that.
And I think he'd be very beneficial to all of your association audiences.
That's fantastic. Well, Joel, in a busy week for you, thank you so much for making time for us. And Lucas, thanks for making time East Coast time for us when you're all the way over there on the West Coast. So appreciate both of you being here. Wonderful episode. I really hope our audience benefits from hearing this, and look forward to catching up with you again soon, Joel.
Love to do it again. Aaron, thank you. And Lucas is really the celebrity because it's way too early in the morning where he's at right now.
I hear you.
This is the second or third call of the day. I'll just keep it going. But thank you, Joel. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, man.